This woman injected herself with a mysterious substance, and a young, beautiful girl crawled out of her back. Now they are supposed to take turns living, but one of them decides to break the rule. Let's see what happened next. A scientist injects some kind of green substance into an egg yolk, and another yolk separates from it. A star is placed on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in Los Angeles. It bears the name Elizabeth Sparkle. This woman is a famous actress and an Academy Award winner. Unfortunately, year after year she gradually fades. Her star becomes covered with cracks and stains. In the present day, the still attractive Elizabeth Sparkle hosts an aerobics TV show. In reality, however, she is already 50 years old. After filming another episode, Elizabeth heads to her dressing room. She looks exhausted but tries not to show it to anyone. The woman goes to the restroom and overhears her producer, Harvey, talking to someone on the phone. It seems he thinks Elizabeth is too old and wants to replace her with a younger, more attractive woman. The protagonist is devastated. During lunch, Harvey informs Elizabeth of his decision. From that day on, she is fired. The protagonist drives home and notices workers removing a giant billboard with her image on it. She takes her eyes off the road and gets into an accident. Elizabeth survives and is not seriously injured. She sits in the hospital crying bitterly. A nurse examines her back and leaves a flash drive in the pocket of her coat labeled, "The Substance." An elderly man named Fred approaches the actress on the street and claims they were classmates. He invites Elizabeth for coffee and gives her his phone number. At home, the protagonist takes the flash drive given to her by the nurse and watches an advertisement video for the miraculous drug called The Substance. It allows any person to split their DNA, trigger cellular regeneration, and create a younger, more beautiful version of themselves. The old and the new persona must live in symbiosis and switch every 7 days. Elizabeth throws the flash drive into the trash and goes to a bar for a martini. After another drink, she feels nauseous. The woman returns home, looks at her trophies and awards, and smashes one of them. Then she takes the flash drive out of the trash bag, calls the number on it, and orders the miracle drug. In the morning, Elizabeth feels terrible. She notices in the newspaper an advertisement announcing auditions for a new host for her TV show, and she heads to some slum-like area to pick up her order. She finds the correct locker and takes home a cardboard box. Inside it are a syringe, a vial, a single-use activator, and several instructions. Elizabeth walks into the bathroom, fills the syringe with the bright yellow substance, and injects herself. A few seconds later, she collapses onto the floor. She writhes in unbearable pain as something begins moving inside her body. A hole appears in her back, and a younger version of Elizabeth crawls out of it. The new girl examines herself in the mirror. She is slim, youthful, and unbelievably attractive. She has a beautiful, tall, flexible body and perfect skin without a single wrinkle. Elizabeth's new version notices her old self lying on the floor. The scene is, to put it mildly, far from pleasant. The girl feels sick. She stitches up her creator's back with black thread and takes a shower. Walking to the mirror, she sees that her nose is bleeding. According to the instructions, the new version must inject herself with stabilizer taken from Elizabeth's spine. The young girl does so and immediately feels better. The protagonist's new version is not only very beautiful but also incredibly flexible. She puts on a bright yellow coat that Elizabeth used to wear. She walks through the city streets and goes to audition for the TV show from which her old version was fired. The girl introduces herself as Sue and makes such a huge impression on the producers that Harvey hires her immediately. He even agrees that this beauty can only work every other week, since she claims she must take care of her sick mother. In a short time, Sue becomes incredibly popular. Her photos appear on the city's main billboards, and her aerobics workouts receive the highest ratings. Sue strictly follows every instruction and injects herself daily with stabilizing serum taken from her old body, which remains unconscious the entire time. Sue basks in the glory that once belonged to Elizabeth. 7 days pass, which means it's time to switch. Sue performs the necessary steps and collapses unconscious onto the floor. At that very moment, Elizabeth regains consciousness. Despite the intense pain, she looks at Sue with curiosity. Now the protagonist must live 7 days in her old body. For a few days she stays at home watching television, then goes to the office of the illegal company that sold her the substance to obtain another dose of the miracle drug. After 7 days, Elizabeth transforms back into Sue. She enjoys her youth and beauty and even decides to do some renovations. A neighbor comes to complain about the noise, But when the beauty opens the door, he immediately begins flirting with her. Sue hides her old version in a secret room behind the bathroom and removes Elizabeth's portrait from the apartment. She goes to work and brilliantly hosts another TV show. This girl is the perfect aerobics trainer. Her body was literally made for these movements. Another 7 days pass, so it is time to switch bodies again. However, instead of doing so, Sue goes to a party and returns home with a young, handsome guy. At the most critical moment, her nose starts bleeding. Sue rushes to Elizabeth and discovers that the old body does not look good either. Instead of switching bodies, Sue takes another dose of stabilizer from Elizabeth's spine and returns to her admirer. Only after that does she follow the instructions and bring the old version back to life. Elizabeth feels extremely unwell. She sees that one of her fingers is dark and deformed. Is the protagonist turning into a zombie? Elizabeth calls the manufacturer of the substance and complains about the drug's side effects. Unfortunately, there is no way to fix it. If the balance is disturbed, the consequences will be catastrophic. Elizabeth cleans up the apartment and watches a TV show starring Sue. Someone rings the doorbell. The neighbor wants to see Sue. The protagonist does not open the door. She picks up another dose of the miracle drug and goes to a local cafe, trying not to attract attention. Elizabeth notices an elderly man sitting next to her and realizes that he also uses the substance. The woman recognizes him as the hospital nurse who advised her to use this rejuvenation method. The old man admits that over time, people forget that everyone matters, not only the youngest and the most beautiful. Because of this, the new version ends up consuming the old one. Elizabeth feels extremely unwell. She notices that one of her fingers is dark and deformed. Is the protagonist turning into a zombie? Elizabeth calls the manufacturer of the substance and complains about the drug's side effects. Unfortunately, there is no way to fix it. If the balance is disturbed, the consequences will be catastrophic. Elizabeth cleans up the apartment and watches a TV show starring Sue. Someone rings the doorbell. It's the neighbor who wants to see Sue. The protagonist does not open the door. She picks up another dose of the miracle drug and goes to a local cafe, trying not to attract attention. Elizabeth notices an elderly man sitting next to her and realizes that he also uses the substance. She recognizes him as the hospital nurse who advised her to use this rejuvenation method. The old man admits that over time, people forget that everyone matters, not only the youngest and most beautiful. Because of this, the new version ends up consuming the old one. Terrified, Elizabeth flees from the cafe. When she gets home, she finds the phone number of her former classmate, Fred. She calls him and invites him to dinner. She prepares for the meeting, putting on a beautiful red dress with long gloves and applying her makeup. Just before leaving the apartment, Elizabeth catches sight of a billboard featuring the beautiful Sue and changes her mind. Hysterically, she washes off her makeup and does not respond to Fred's messages. 7 days later, Sue returns and holds another brilliant workout session. During the aerobics routine, however, the girl feels as if her body is deforming and runs to the dressing room. Something strange appears inside her body. From her navel, she pulls out a chicken leg. Suddenly, Sue wakes up. It was only a nightmare. The girl realizes that her old version spent the entire week sitting in front of the TV, eating unhealthy food. Sue calls the drug manufacturer and complains about Elizabeth's behavior. She is reminded that they are two parts of the same person. The girl arrives at work and learns that filming has been canceled. Harvey calls Sue into his office and offers her the chance to host another show. One that is even more viewed, more popular, and trendier. It is the best program on the entire channel, watched by 50 million people. Sue decides to break the rules once again. She extracts too much stabilizer from her old version and lives far longer than 7 days. When Elizabeth regains consciousness, she screams in horror. Her body has aged rapidly, and she now looks at least 20 years older. Elizabeth hysterically calls the supplier of the substance, who suggests that she end the experiment and remain herself forever. But she refuses. Elizabeth looks and feels like a truly old woman. She watches an interview with Sue and once again eats unhealthy food. The woman realizes that she hates her younger version and envies her so much that she would gladly destroy her, but she cannot. Instead, Elizabeth brings Sue back to life. Sue sees the wrecked apartment and the table covered with food and decides that she will never switch bodies with Elizabeth again. She extracts enough stabilizer from Elizabeth's spine to last 3 months. During that time, Sue becomes even more popular. Soon, the New Year's Eve TV special premieres, in which the girl plays the leading role. One day before the show, Sue notices that she is running out of stabilizer. She calls the manufacturer and asks for a new dose of the drug. She is informed that the only source of stabilizer is Elizabeth herself. They must switch bodies so that the older version can recover and replenish the supply. There is no other option. Sue grabs the necessary tools and crawls over to Elizabeth. We see that the protagonist has turned into a frail old woman, wrinkled and bald. Her body is covered in horrifying spots, and worse still, she has a massive hump on her back. Elizabeth calls the manufacturer and says she wants to stop the experiment. She hides her ugliness under loose clothes and large sunglasses. She goes to the substances office and picks up another package. Inside is a syringe containing a serum that is supposed to destroy Sue. Elizabeth begins the procedure but realizes she cannot get rid of her younger version. She stops injecting the serum and revives Sue instead. By doing so, she disrupts the balance of their symbiosis, and both versions remain fully conscious. The girl opens her eyes and sees Elizabeth standing before her with a half-empty syringe on the floor. Sue realizes what her old version intended to do and attacks Elizabeth. The protagonist locks herself in the bathroom. Sue kicks down the door and, with several brutal blows, ends Elizabeth's life. Afterward, Sue goes to the New Year's Eve TV show filming. She puts on her makeup and changes clothes, but then she begins to feel unwell. Remember, Elizabeth and Sue are two parts of the same person. As a consequence of Elizabeth's death, Sue's body also begins to deteriorate. Several of her teeth fall out. Then she loses a fingernail and her right ear. Terrified and hysterical, Sue runs out of the studio and rushes home. She injects herself with another dose of the activator to create a new version of herself. But things do not go according to plan. A true monster crawls out of her back. It is a hybrid of the two versions, and from now on it must be called Monstro Elizabeth Sue. The monstrous Elizabeth Sue puts on Sue's festive dress and an improvised mask made from Elizabeth's face, then goes to the New Year's Eve show. The horrifying hybrid walks onto the stage, greets the audience, and at that very moment, the mask falls off. The audience recoils in terror. Panic erupts in the theater. People call Elisa Sue a monster and try to drag her off the stage. A moment later, the grotesque hybrid loses its head. Blood sprays across the entire auditorium. The protagonist's remains make their way out of the building and fall apart into pieces. Elizabeth's face crawls toward her star on the Walk of Fame, looks up at the sky, smiles, and dissolves into nothingness. By morning, a red puddle is washed off the sidewalk.